Exodus 23. I have us scheduled for 19 verses tonight, verses 1 through 19. And I have a reason for not wanting to go past verse 19 tonight. It's because verse 19 really is the completion of the civil law as far as it concerns Exodus. Now, we're going to get more about the civil law later in the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy. So if you've really been enjoying this bit by bit, piece by piece breakdown of the Ten Commandments, we're not done with it yet. There's going to be more in future studies. But as far as Exodus is concerned, we're going to bring that to a finality tonight in this study. Verse 19 really brings it to a close. If you wanted to argue with me that the civil law really stops at verse 9, I would consent to that as well. That's really the last of those practical laws that tell us how to live by the Ten Commandments. And then after verse 9, from verses 10 through 19, really you have closing words about the civil law, reminders about how serious God is with these civil laws that he has given us connected to those commandments, reminders about the religious feasts. And then in verse 20, which is why verse 19 is a good stopping point, because at verse 20 then we get this special promise that is given to the nation at the end of this chapter, verses 20 through 33. And with that promise of special guidance and special blessing and special victory comes a pretty stern warning from the Lord, a word of caution about violating or offending that special privilege, that special provision that the Lord gives to the nation. And then we move into chapter 24 and we see Moses on the top of Mount Sinai communicating with the Lord. Chapters 25 and on, it's Moses up there receiving the instruction for the building of the tabernacle and all of the instruments of worship that will be used in the tabernacle. And throughout the rest of the book, that's going to be the major focus as we move on into those things. There are some laws interspersed throughout as we study, but what you're going to find is those are ceremonial laws, and I put that into a second division of the law of Moses. You have the civil law and the ceremonial law. So from here on out, we're basically, after tonight, I should say, looking at the ceremonial law, how to build the tabernacle and everything needed for the tabernacle, and some laws about worship and how those services are to be conducted and how the priests are to handle themselves in the presence of the Lord. All of those things are coming. So tonight, let's bring this civil law to an end in our study. Whether we make it to verse 9 or verse 19, we'll be doing that. We're going to count this a victory either way. We're going to count this the completion of the civil law. But before we get to reading verses, I just want to leave you with one point that perhaps you would notice as we studied through, if I didn't point it out to you. You'll notice that up until this point in the civil law, we've been reading about crimes and the punishments for those crimes. But you'll notice in these first 9 or these first 19 verses, there is not one recommended punishment for the do's and don'ts that we're going to see here. So all we get in these verses are the do's and the don'ts. It appears at one time as if the Lord is going to launch into a punishment for those that offend a certain item that he's mentioning here, but it's almost as he starts off in that direction, he pulls back. He doesn't recommend a punishment, and then he just says, no, don't do it. I'll show you that when we get there, if we get that far tonight. But I just thought I'd point this out. Really, it's a different thing. These are do's and don'ts. These are recommended behaviors and attitudes that help us to accomplish justice and true righteousness. And the Lord doesn't recommend punishments for these. He just wants us to grab hold of these with our hearts, desire them from our hearts, and live by them. And I, for one, have enjoyed these studies through the civil law. They are a lot of fun for me. I find a lot of humor in them, and I'm kind of sad to see that come to an end tonight. but I'll be okay. There's more coming in the future. So let's have a look. Verse 1, the Lord says, "You shall not circulate a false report." Now, verses 1 and 2 and verses 7 and 8 are all connected to the 9th commandment, "You shall not bear false witness." We've already studied the 6th commandment, which is, "You shall not murder," or "You shall not kill," if you're reading from the King James Version. And as we've studied through the civil law, we've been given those expanded laws connected to the 6th commandment, "You shall not murder." And now in verses 1 and 2 and verses 7 and 8, we're going to get the expanded laws for the 9th commandment, "You shall not bear false witness." Just take the two of those and put them together, and I think you learn something valuable. The Lord is against assassination of any kind. He is against the assassination of an individual. He is against the assassination of that person's reputation or character. Now, obviously to us, the more serious one is the physical act of murder. But the Lord here in chapter 23 takes us back to the root cause of that, the thing that develops in the heart that could lead to something as extreme as murder, and it would be this: spreading a false report, a false witness that assassinates someone's reputation in the eyes of another person. The Lord wants that person alive, but he also wants their reputation to stand on its own and not be negatively influenced by false words, false stories, false witnesses that you give about that individual. Now, everyone appreciates a good sense of humor, but there is no such thing as a good sense of rumor. Let that sink in for a minute. Everyone appreciates a good sense of humor, but there is no such thing as a good sense of rumor. So don't be guilty of spreading rumors. Do not gossip. If it's a rumor or if it's gossip, then by definition, what does that mean? By definition of either of those words, that means you have not validated or verified the facts of the story. If it's gossip to you, if it's rumor to you, that means you haven't done the legwork to find out if what was shared with you was actually true or not. Now, when you get wind of rumors or gossip or stories that are shared with you about another individual, we're talking about secondhand stuff here, secondhand information that did not come from the horse's mouth. When you get those things, that bit and piece of information, that gossip, that rumor, you have two healthy options. At least those are the only things I can find in Scripture that are healthy. Two healthy options. Option number one is verification for the purpose of ministry. Verification for the purpose of ministry. You can start with the person that's telling you the story, and you can begin to question them. Who's your source? Who told you that? Can I call them? And if you do that, usually you'll run the gossiper off. You'll run the talebearer off, and they won't come back because they know you take notes. You're serious about getting to the bottom of the issue. But if that's you, if that's the option that you choose, then what you do is you seek out verification of that story for the purpose of ministry. You're going there to accomplish something, but you are going there with an aim, and that aim is spiritual. You're going to find out if the story is true. If that person really does have the sin problem that the other person told you they had. If they're really struggling in the area that other person said that they are. And if it's true. See, this is the point of either option. You never get to the point where you spread the story anyway. If it's true, you don't spread the story. You stop right there. You verified the facts. You've got the story straight, and now you minister to that person. You encourage them in the Lord. You help them through that problem. You provide some scriptures that will give them strength to endure those temptations or overcome those problems. It's for the purpose of restoring a person back into the faith, back into the church, as the case may be. Option number 2 is the best option of all. It's the one I like the most. It's kind of where I put my stand. And that is when the gossiper comes to you, when the person comes to you with that rumor, just take this stance. You determine in your heart to be the person where those rumors and that gossip comes to die. You don't spread it any further. We're told in the book of Proverbs, chapter 26, verse 20, where there is no wood, the fire goes out. It also goes out if your wood is wet. If you get wet firewood, the fire don't work. But where there is no wood, the fire goes out. And where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. Don't fuel those fires. Don't become a part of the problem of gossip, but be part of the solution. And that would be, don't entertain it at all. I don't want to hear it. Oh, but it's juicy. I don't want to hear it. Oh, but you're going to think differently of that other person. Yep, that's what I'm afraid of. And I don't want to hear it. Always remember this when it comes to gossipers, when it comes to people that come to you with rumors. And again, we've talked about this before. You know it can be veiled as a spiritual thing. Arlyn, I got to tell you what I saw Melanie doing. Now, I'm only telling you this so that you can be praying for her. You know, we want to be... No, that's not why you're telling me. You're telling me that because you want to change my opinion of Melanie. You want to wreck that person's reputation in my eyes. That's why you're telling me that, right? So always remember this when the gossiper or the talebearer comes to you, or they bring that rumor or that super spiritual prayer request that you know is really actually gossip. Remember this. If they're talking about other people to you, what does that mean? That means they're talking about you to other people. So be wary of people like that. Watch very closely your associations with people. Let people develop a reason to trust them. And if that reason isn't there, be wise. Be wise, or you'll be adding fuel to that fire and you're going to be the one burned in the end. Reading on. Do not put your hand with the wicked. We would say it like this: don't shake hands with the wicked, or don't come into an agreement with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Now, in a legal setting, that is known as perjury. It's where two people intentionally agree together on a false account, a lie. They prearrange that. They know it's not the truth, but they link up with someone, usually because there's some potential benefit to the both of them financially or judicially, punitively. In some way, there's a benefit for that union, so they strengthen the case. They don't care about the truth. They bend the story how they want to. They strengthen that case. They both move forward, or as many people are as unified in this as possible, they move forward with that lie, that false witness, as their agreed upon story. As you know, what makes a lie so difficult is trying to remember it. When you're doing this, when you're shaking hands and making agreement that is based on false witness, you got to go over your story. You got to get it down. You can't slip up in your speech. And you don't have that problem when you're being truthful. When you're being truthful about something, especially in a court case, something you witnessed, there's no preparation for that testimony. You don't have to sit and go over your notes. Well, I got to make sure I don't say this. That'll give me away. There's none of that. The truth is easier to remember because it's the truth. And it's easier to stick with and get the straight story without slipping up because there's nothing to slip up on. So when you got two people that are joining hands together to be unrighteous witnesses, the scary thing about this is the weight that a witness holds. That's the real danger here. It's one thing for someone to tell you of something that took place, and it's another thing altogether when you have other people chiming in and confirming that story, saying, it's true, I heard it, I saw it, I know it, it's true. The more witnesses you have, the more credibility that adds to the case. So if it's a true witness, That's a wonderful thing, because what that does is that aids that case, or those people involved in that case, that aids them in accomplishing true justice. But when you got false witnesses, it's a horrible, awful thing, because what those false witnesses do is they strengthen the lie. They convince the judge and the jurors. They convince you and I, who are making personal judgments or decisions on matter. They convince us falsely against the truth. That is the real danger there. False witnesses can lead to grave injustices. Several years ago, when I had my car accident and I suffered some injuries, I had to bring a lawsuit against the person that hit me because she didn't have insurance. She was driving illegally, and she was going 60 miles an hour in a 25, and she blew through an intersection and hit me at 65 miles an hour, just blowing right through her red light. And there I was going to work, just cruising along, 35 miles an hour, the speed limit, with my seatbelt on, with my registration up to date, probably. But I did have insurance. There I was by the book, just doing my thing, driving through the green light. Wham, she nails me. And the only recourse I had was to bring a lawsuit against her. So I went to my attorneys, and my attorneys sent me to a chiropractor to help to establish my injuries for the official report, the actual lawsuit, and also, at least that was their story, to help me with the injuries. I think they were more concerned about the other thing. Nonetheless, this was their guy. They gave me this guy's number. They set up an appointment for me with this guy. This was their guy. He was the guy they always worked with, and I quickly found out why. Because I would tell him the story. I would tell him about my injuries. I would give him a truthful account on how bad those injuries were, and that was all I would say. I wouldn't embellish it, and I wouldn't lie about it, and he would say, okay, well, we need to word it like this. And I would say, but that's not true. You're making it worse than it is. And he would go back and forth with me on that. And then finally he got to the point where he said, okay, now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to write down in the documentation that you suffered a neck injury, because that's going to strengthen our case, and that's going to help us to get the biggest settlement that we can from this. And I said, but that is not true. My neck is fine. And I had to sit there, and I couldn't believe I had to do this, but I had to explain to the guy, I'm not interested in building the strongest story or the most sure case so that I can get the biggest settlement. I said, here's all that I want to do. I want to go into that courtroom with everything on paper, accurate and truthful. If they decide that I win the settlement, fine. If they decide I lose it, fine. If I win it, whatever they set that settlement amount to be, I'm fine with that. I'm going to do this right. And he looked at me as if I had just fallen off the turnip truck. Like, who does this? Who thinks like this? Who works like this? He was shocked. I got the impression that this happens over and over and over again, and precious few people will care more about the truth than the strength of the case that's involved. And that is a crying shame. Folks, don't make agreements with the wicked to pervert justice for your own personal gain or for the personal gain of other people that you're striking deals with. Don't do it. Be truthful. Again, I'll say it again. Be truthful to your own hurt. Swear to your own hurt, as the Bible teaches us, even if it doesn't help your case. Even if you know it's going to make you lose the case, the truth is the truth, and that's what we should be interested in. Verse 2. Verse 19 is looking bad. Verse 2. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute, so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. So just because the crowd is believing it and saying it and doing it, that does not make it right. We know this. Generally, the multitude is going to be on the wrong side of truth, righteousness, and justice. Why is that? Because it's just a statistical fact that the majority of people in our world, in our society, in any given society, the majority of the people do not love the truth. It's just true. And I shouldn't have to tell this to a bunch of Christians because you already know this, but I'll say it anyway. Get used to being in the minority. That should be where you feel somewhat comfortable, if it's possible. What should make you uncomfortable is when you find out that you are in perfect agreement with the multitudes. When popular opinion or majority opinion is the same opinion that you hold, I don't know about you, but that's when I start saying, okay, let me go back to the books. Let me go back to the prayer closet and make sure I got this right, because generally, I'm not on that side of the fence. How about you? Generally, I'm in the minority. So don't just go with the flow. Any dead fish can go with the flow. That's true. It takes nothing to go with the flow. You know what's different? Going against the flow. Swimming upstream. Going against the current because it's the right thing to do. You don't do that just for opposition's sake or just to be different or weird or stand out. But in matters of truth, the majority is always going to be going one way, and you're always going to be fighting it going upstream. To fight that, to go upstream against falsehood, false witness, lies, wickedness, evil, unrighteousness, it's going to require integrity and courage to stand on truth when no one else is. When you're the only one fighting for it or standing on it. So, just a good general rule of thumb. Be nervous when you're in a perfect alignment with the masses. Be nervous. But if you're standing on the truth, it doesn't matter how many people are against you. If you're standing on the truth, keep on standing. Stick with it. Verse 3, you shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. And now we really need to bring verse 6 in with this, because verse 6 is the other side of this coin. So let's read verse 6 too. You shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. So both ways, right? Verse 3 says you can't favor the poor just because he's poor. And verse 6 says that you should never pervert justice and rule against the poor just because he's poor. So either way, don't vote for him because he's poor. Don't vote against him just because he's poor. Socioeconomic status should have nothing to do with determining right and wrong in a case. That has nothing to do with it. How much a person earns, how much they own, what their position is in life, whether they're prominent and influential or poor and unknown, that has nothing to do with the case. Every case, each individual case, needs to stand on its own and be based on nothing but truth and facts, and that's it. Now, I'm sure you're comfortable with that kind of statement, and every single one of you are thinking, I would never even think of doing that. I would never even think of showing partiality to the poor man because he's poor, or showing partiality against the poor man just because he's poor. Let's test that. Let's test that. Because this sort of thing happens all the time. The little guy, the poor man, the unknown person brings a lawsuit against the wealthy, evil mega corporation. Probably a company that you can't stand because of principles that they operate from, or people that they've hurt, or wrong that they've done you. You wanted to return a product, they wouldn't take it, whatever. When those cases happen, who are you pulling for? I figured. You're pulling for the poor guy. You're favoring him. Why? Because he could use the cash settlement. And that mega corporation, they've got more than enough money right now that they don't even know what to do with. They've even left the business world and started investing in vaccines and doing all sorts of crazy stuff because they've got so much money. So you're pulling for the poor guy. But that is not based on the merits of the case, is it? That's picking a guy. Why? Because he's poor. Because he needs it more. And as much as I would not want to stand up and throw my hat in the ring with the mega corporation, if the facts are the fact that the mega corporation did nothing wrong and that poor person was just trying to get money, maybe they spilled coffee on themselves and didn't have the sense to know that would burn them. So they sued the restaurant for millions of dollars. That's not a hypothetical. Maybe they walked into the store and they brought in their own mud that they slipped on, but they sued the store. Who do you pull for in those cases? You give true witness. You can't have your opinion, you can't have your witness slanted by wealth, position, race, none of that. It's not a factor in the case. The only factor is the truth and the details about the case. Outside of our Justice Department today, there stands a statue of a blindfolded woman with scales in her hands. And that statue was built based upon the biblical principle of justice being blind to everything but facts and truth. And in the ancient Persian Empire, they actually did this. They actually practiced this. They blindfolded their judges before their judges were brought into the courts. And those judges couldn't look at anyone in that courtroom. They couldn't see who was who. They couldn't even judge whether they thought the person was telling the truth based upon appearance and expression. They had none of that. All they could do is hear. They could hear the arguments from both cases. They got the info. They got the details. They got the truth. They got the witnesses. And that was what had to be used to determine the outcome of the case. And I say, right on. That's the way it should be. Justice should be blind to everything but those details involved in that case. And that's what the Lord is trying to teach us here. Verse 4. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall sit back and enjoy. Now that's the temptation. You shall surely bring it back to him again. Verse 5. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. So there it is. That's the Lord. Do you see that? He starts to launch into, if you don't do this and you're waiting for the punishment, you're getting ready for the Lord to give the recommendation of what happens to you for not taking his counsel here. But then the Lord just stops and says, don't do it. If you're not going to do this, don't do it. So it's because you're hurt or offended by that individual that this becomes the temptation. You're tempted to watch your neighbor's donkey or ox, his work animal, just lumber off into the forest. You know he's going to be lost. You know your neighbor, that person you can't stand for whatever reason, you know he's going to suffer that loss. And there you are, grabbing a bag of chips, kicking back in the recliner and watching out your window with a smile on your face. That bozo's losing his donkey. And I love it. It's the temptation to just sit there and watch as your neighbor's work animal is bending and buckling under the heavy workload that is on top of him. It's where you're tempted to sit back and maybe even enjoy a little bit as you see the loss or the struggle of your enemy. You sit there and you don't say a word as you see the thief break into his 2021 Subaru and start working on hot wiring the thing. And you're just watching. You could call the cops. You could call the neighbor. You could let your enemy know. But you're just watching, and before long, he gets that thing hot-wired, and your enemy loses his vehicle. Here's the trickiest thing to figure out in a situation like this. And I think it's where all of our minds go. It's our tendency in this moment to think, I know what's happening here. The Lord is judging that wicked enemy of mine. The Lord is vindicating me in this quarrel, and I just don't like to interfere with the Lord. I just don't want to get involved, because if it's the Lord judging this person and causing this person to suffer loss because of how they've treated me, then I want to make sure I don't mess the Lord up. But did you notice the Lord tells us what to do here? Because that could be true. That could be the Lord's will for him to lose his donkey or his ox. It could be the Lord's will for that thief to run off with his 2021 Subaru and teach this guy a lesson and judge him and try to wake him up and turn him to the Lord. That all could be the Lord's work. But the Lord is essentially saying this in this passage. It doesn't matter. As far as you're concerned, don't worry about what the Lord is doing. What he might be planning, what he might be teaching your neighbor, that enemy of yours. The Lord says, don't even think about it. Don't even pray about it, because if you take the time to pray about it, that donkey's gone. That Subaru's lost. Don't even pray about it. Don't even think about it. You just get involved, get down there, grab that ox. Maybe more so for the men. Grab that donkey, bring it back. Make that call to the cops so that the poor guy doesn't lose his Subaru. Get involved, because even if it is the Lord's testing or judgment of your enemy, it's also a test for you to see if you'll do the right thing, to see if you'll treat that enemy of yours the way you want to be treated, to see if you'll care about protecting that other person's possessions as much as you would care about protecting your own possessions. So don't you worry about it if you interfere with the Lord's judgment, because the Lord will be sure to turn around someday and accomplish his judgment or teach those lessons to your enemy, and he'll probably pick a time when you're not looking and paying attention so that he can get it done. But make it tough for him. If you see it, then you stop it. This is a true story. This is from decades ago now. This really happened. One of the most bizarre news stories you'd ever read. There was a guy that was driving to a mall one day, and he heard all kind of noise that sounded like it was coming from his engine compartment. He smelled this really foul smell. He knew something was wrong. He drove to the mall. He gets there. He parks in the mall parking lot, and he gets out and he pops open the hood. And he's horrified by what he sees. The best guess is that the night before, on a cold night, a cat had climbed up into the engine compartment to find warmth. And when the guy started his car in the morning, Rachel, cover your ears. Cat lovers, cover your ears. When the guy started the vehicle in the morning to go to the mall, the cat got caught up in the fan belt. And that's like a food chopper right there. And it chopped that cat to pieces. So when he opened that hood, that's what he found. He was horrified. And he did the only thing he knew to do. He got in the back of his vehicle. He found a brown paper bag. That shows you how old this story was. Not a plastic bag, a brown paper bag. And he started putting those cat parts in the brown paper bag, what was left of it. When he was done, he was nauseated, he was disgusted, he was grossed out. And so he closed the hood of his truck and he folded up the paper bag and he placed it on the hood of his vehicle, and he went into one of the shops to wash his hands. Now, this is where the story gets really interesting. As if it wasn't already. He comes out of the shop after washing his hands, and he looks to where his vehicle is, and he sees a lady eyeing up that bag that's sitting on the top of his hood. And he stops dead in his tracks because he suspected what came next. She eyes up that bag. You know what she's thinking it is, and you know what it really is. And she looks this way, and she looks that way, and the coast was clear. So she grabs that bag, and she runs back to her vehicle. She gets into her vehicle, and she drives off. Now, the guy saw this, and he was very curious about what would happen. So he gets in his vehicle, and he follows her. And she drives about, this is a true story. It's tough to believe. This is a true story. She drives about a block away, and she pulls into a coffee shop. She goes in there, sits down at a table, and plops the bag up there on the table. And in comes the guy that had that bag stolen from him, and he sits down, and he's just watching the whole thing. And the lady opens the bag, and when she opens the bag, she belts out this scream, and then she starts shaking, and then she falls over on the ground in a convulsion of some sort. So the coffee shop manager calls the ambulance. The ambulance shows up. They come in with the stretcher, and they pick her up off the ground, throw her on the stretcher, and they take her out to the ambulance and throw her up in the back of the ambulance. And just as they're getting ready to close the ambulance door, the guy comes running out with the bag. And he says, ma'am, hold on, you forgot your bag. And he plops the bag right on the woman's chest. True story. And that teaches a very vital spiritual truth. If your neighbor loses his ox or donkey or cat, you bring it. No, that's not the lesson of the story there. The lesson of the story is even when you feel like it's your vindication, you know, if you're outside of the Christian church, you might feel like it's karma. This is the universe, man. She stole that. And not that I really cared about parting with that bag of chopped up cat parts, but the principle behind it, she stole it, so she deserves this. But that's not what the Bible would teach. What should he have done? Left the cat bag alone. Probably visited her in the hospital to make sure she was okay. So even in those cases, church, where you think, oh, this is a perfect divine setup to give my enemy what my enemy deserves, is that the way that you're supposed to handle your enemies? Is that what the Lord taught us? Didn't the Lord teach us, Romans chapter 12, verse 21, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43, you've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And when all else fails and there's nothing else you can do, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Verse 7. Keep yourself far from a false matter. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. But thank the Lord, in Romans chapter 4, verse 5, the Lord tells us that he will justify the ungodly. That's great news for all of us, because at one time we were ungodly. At one time we were stuck in our sin, and the Lord did justify us. But look at the difference there. For the wicked person that is unrepentant, disinterested in living a godly lifestyle, not willing to repent of sin, there is no justification for that person. But for the ungodly person, the sinner, the struggling person, the individual caught between right and wrong and not often making the right choice, if that person will repent and desire godliness, the Lord will justify them. Isn't that part of the equation that the Lord gave us there in the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5? It's for the kingdom is for those that hunger and thirst after righteousness. If we hunger and thirst after those things, we will be filled. God will justify the ungodly, but not the unrepentant wicked. Verse 8, and you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. So you've heard that expression, anything is for sale for the right price, right? That's what verse 8 is all about. Now that's a great motto for life possessions. I'm fine with that. I think that's good for me. That's kind of where I stand. There is nothing that I own that is not for sale for the right price. I mean, you come take a look at my home and everything I have. If the price is right, I will sell it to you. So that's a good life motto for worldly possessions. It is not a good life motto when it comes to those giving testimony or those making judgments on other individuals. Proverbs chapter 23, verse 23. That's an easy one to remember. Proverbs 23, 23. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Or in the King James Version, buy the truth and sell it not. If I am subpoenaed to give a damning testimony against someone, and that Sunday, just before the trial, just before the case, that individual comes into this church service, slips something into the offering plate, the secretary gives it to me later. Lo and behold, it's a love gift for the pastor, $20,000. And there's a little note attached to it that says, remember me when you come into your witness stand. What am I tempted to do? I'm tempted to change up my testimony a little bit. He's misunderstood. Did he do that? I don't want to point fingers. Who's to say what's right and what's wrong? I forget what I saw. I'm tempted to do that. What does the Bible tell me to do? Return to sender. I know that's a bribe. I know that is to change my opinion on the testimony that I'm going to give. So the Lord would say, return to sender. Don't want it. Don't take it. He didn't even say, go ahead and take the bribe, but don't change your testimony. I would have liked that. Keep the check and say, sorry, bud, I'm still telling the truth. But the Lord says, don't even take the bribe. Return to sender. Now, I go in there and I give the truth. I give that damning testimony, and he's imprisoned. He's fined. The punishment is leveled against him. Now, if he still wants to give me a check for $20,000, I'm $20,000 richer and I have a new friend. But I highly doubt he's going to want to do that. You know why? It's because he wasn't giving me money to bless me. He was giving me money to bribe me. Now, just think about your government for a minute. Oh boy, Lord help us. This is where we're going to spend the rest of our time tonight. Think about your government. And think about your world. You know how much corruption is in our government and in our world because of verse 8 and people's refusal to comply with verse 8. Because of bribes that are handed out, deals that are struck. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And through that, all sorts of corruption takes place. The wicked person is selected for a position in leadership, not because they deserve it, but because they're the highest bidder. I'll have you do this. I shouldn't say it. I shouldn't even mention it. It's probably going to get taken down off of Facebook. You know what? I'm not even going to say it. I'll just say, no, I can't.
Oh, come on.
All right, but if I get in trouble, go home and research Hunter Biden's new hobby. You know what it is? It's painting. It's painting. Now, he just started painting, and his paintings are selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let me ask you, you really think he's that good of a painter? I think you'd have to be pretty gullible to believe that. You'd have to have just fallen off the turnip truck, I think, to believe that. No, the truth is, this is how bribes work. You have a cover. Now, for Facebook, I'll say, I don't know this for sure, so I'm not making any accusations. I'll just say this. It looks shady that you have a cover, and underneath that cover, there's real corruption happening. People are paying for favors. If it is true, here's how it works. You buy my painting, And I talk to my dad, the President of the United States, for you. You pay enough money, we'll give you some big favors. Is that happening? I'll let you research and you be the judge. I'm trying not to get thrown off of Facebook. But what about our world that we live in? What about the corruption in our world that takes place because of bribes? Drug companies, paying people to look the other way, because those people are wicked and corrupt in their hearts. And they get their money, and then they turn a blind eye to the negatives, the side effects that were proven during the trials, and they turn their way. They got their money, and they don't care about what happened to you, but they stamp their approval on it. This sort of thing happens all the time in our world. Corruption has dug in deep, and the Lord would have us to be different, even if we're the only ones in this world being different and not taking bribes and not letting the big spenders tip what we believe when it comes to justice, righteousness, right and wrong, good and evil, but sticking with the Lord's definitions and the truth of every situation as best as we know it. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help us God. Verse 9. We're going to stop at verse 9 tonight. Verse 9, and you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Does that sound familiar? We had that in Exodus chapter 22. The Lord brings it back into Exodus 23. When the Lord does that, you know it's for a reason. He doesn't waste words or mince words. So when the Lord revisits a topic and rewords it either exactly or changes the wording up a little bit, but essentially says the same thing, he's doing one of two things. He's either re-emphasizing and bringing an immediate importance to something he's already taught, or he is reiterating it in a way that provides new light, new illumination, new information as to that topic. I think it's a little bit of both here, because if you look at the wording, the Lord does go into a new depth here on this topic. He doesn't say, as before, don't oppress the stranger. Remember, you were strangers. He takes it a step further. He says, don't oppress the stranger. You know the heart of a stranger. You know what that felt like. You experienced that, so you know the feelings in the heart of that stranger. Now, since we covered that last week, I'm not going to cover it again, looking at it in the immediate context and the literal application. But what I want to do is I want to get us thinking a little more spiritual, modern, and church-centered with just that principle that we just covered. Let me say it like this. The Bible tells us in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 12, that at one time, every single one of us were without Christ, aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But verse 19, Paul says, now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. So just think about this for a minute. If you're a Jew, this doesn't apply to you. So if you got Jew in your blood, you can be dismissed. We'll see you, Rachel. Have a good night. No, I'm kidding. Stick around. Listen to us Gentiles commiserate for a while, all right? If you're a Gentile, that means that by virtue of your birth, you had no right to ever think to be saved and be a partaker of everything that the Lord wrote in this book. You had no hope. You were outside of the nation. You weren't a Jew. You were outside of the covenant. God made that covenant with the Jews. But something big happened, grace, through the sacrifice of Jesus that tore the veil. that made the two, Jew and Gentile, one, brought us all into one body. So now we're saved. The most miraculous, incredible thing happened. The Lord saved a bunch of pagans that didn't have the right religious background. We didn't know anything about the Lord. The Lord saved us anyway. Incredible, amazing. But now we have the memory. We have the heart of the person that's on the outside of the kingdom looking in. And I hope we never get too far away from that. Once we become fellow citizens, members of the household of God, members of anchored fellowship. Amen. Once we have arrived, I hope we never forget where we came from. I hope we never forget learning that truth, that without incredible grace from the Lord, we'd still be strangers. We'd still be aliens. There is such a thing as aliens. They do exist. Everyone outside the church, they're alien. And now keep that in mind. And can I ask you, anchored fellowship, can I ask you a very similar thing as to what the Lord asked the nation of Israel here in chapter 23? Can I ask you to remember the strangers, the foreigners, the outsiders, especially when they come into our church for the first time and they don't feel like they fit, and maybe they don't even look like they fit to the rest of us? They don't know the Lord. They're on the outside looking in. Here we are, privileged and blessed, believing the truth, walking in the truth, being dealt with by the Lord according to truth. They're on the outside looking in. They're lost. They're confused. They're hurting. They're unsaved. They're living in sin. They're wicked in their hearts, as the case may be. Can I ask you to remember them? Can I ask you to remember back what it felt like the first time you walked into a church? And you felt like you stuck out like a sore thumb. And you felt like the stranger, the outsider, the alien. And can I put that on you as a church to remember, to feel that same heart? You have that same heart in you. You've been there. You've been on that same side. And can I put that burden on you as a church to welcome that stranger in and to bring that stranger in? It should never happen that a stranger, a visitor, comes to our church and is here a Sunday or 2 weeks or 2 months or 2.5 years and still feels like a stranger and an outside, and they can't figure out how to break in. They can't figure out how to find a clique for them. They can see the cliques. They can see the tight groups that exist in here, and they can't figure out how to get in. I submit to you, it shouldn't be up to them to have to do that. That should be on us. We should remember what that felt like and what the Lord did for us, or what someone in that church did for you. Someone eventually in that church came up to you and talked to you, I would guess, and made you feel like a part and treated you not like a stranger, but like a fellow citizen. And eventually, that's where you went with it. The Lord brought you to that place, and now you're a member. Now you're a citizen. Well, let's stand.